Warning disclaimer: this story is a fictional dramatization inspired by the life and legacy of Judy Garland, a beloved but deeply troubled figure in Hollywood history. While real-life facts and historical references are used for storytelling depth, the events, hauntings, and supernatural elements portrayed in this story are entirely imagined and not based on verified accounts. The intent is not to disrespect Judy Garland or her family, but to explore the legend through the lens of horror fiction. Reader discretion is advised, especially for those sensitive to themes of death, addiction, and spiritual unrest. The streets of Hollywood shimmer with sunlight during the day, but as the sun sets behind the hills, shadows stretch long and low, hiding secrets that time refuses to forget. Among the city's endless stream of dreamers and fallen stars, the name Judy Garland still floats in the air like a soft, sad melody, haunting, beautiful, and full of longing. When freelance journalist Harper Quinn arrived in Los Angeles to research a book on haunted Hollywood, she had no idea that her most terrifying chapter would begin where the silver screen's golden age had bled into darkness. Harper had always been drawn to the mystique of classic film legends, Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and especially Judy Garland. As a child, she watched The Wizard of Oz dozens of times, enchanted by Garland's voice and that look in her eyes, equal parts magic and melancholy. Now in her 30s, Harper was determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers she had heard. Rumors of Judy's ghost still lingering in old studios, crying in forgotten dressing rooms, even appearing on sound stages that hadn't been used in decades. Her first stop was the defunct MGM lot, now owned by a streaming company. Through a connection in the film industry, she managed to get after-hours access. A security guard named Darnell, a grizzled man with a voice like gravel and nerves of steel, agreed to escort her. "You're not the first to come poking around here about Judy," he muttered as they passed faded posters and peeling murals. But none of them stayed long. As they walked past stage 27, a sharp wind passed through even though the evening air was dead still. Harper paused. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Darnell simply nodded. "Always happens near this one. We call it the crying stage." He didn't elaborate, and Harper didn't ask. Her recorder was running, and she knew better than to interrupt a good silence. Inside one of the old dressing rooms, the wallpaper was yellowed and curling. A cracked mirror sat above a rusted sink, and the faint smell of lavender powder floated in the air. Harper touched the edge of the vanity table and felt a sudden chill. The room was freezing, though it was midsummer. Her breath fogged. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the unmistakable sensation that she wasn't alone. That night, Harper reviewed her audio recordings. Somewhere in the static, after she asked, "Did you feel that?" another voice could be heard. Soft, breathy female. "Please," it whispered, barely audible. "I want to go home." She replayed it dozens of times. It couldn't have been Darnell. His voice was deep, coarse. This voice was tragic, lost. The word home echoed like a cry for help. And for a moment, Harper wasn't a journalist anymore. She was a little girl again, staring wide-eyed at Dorothy on the yellow brick road, clicking her heels and saying those iconic words, "There's no place like home." But now that line felt cursed. Determined to dig deeper, Harper began contacting film historians, archivists, even psychics. She learned that Judy Garland had died in London, far from Hollywood, and that her remains were initially buried in New York before being moved to California decades later. Some believed her spirit never followed her body, trapped somewhere between coasts, between reality and the dream she once chased. One psychic told Harper that Judy's energy clung to the places where she was most vulnerable: her childhood contract offices, her dressing rooms, and the very stages where she'd been pushed to perfection while breaking behind the scenes. Over the next few nights, Harper started having strange dreams, vivid, immersive, and terrifying. In one, she was backstage during a 1940s performance, surrounded by faceless men yelling at her to sing. In another, she stood alone on a yellow brick road that led not to Oz but to a blackened void. And always, she heard that same voice from the recording, weeping just beyond the curtain. Hollywood had always been a city built on illusion, But what Harper was discovering felt too real, too specific. The line between the living and the dead, between fantasy and horror, was blurring. And she was about to learn that not all stars rest in peace. Some burn forever, angry, forgotten, and crying for one last encore. To understand the ghost, Harper needed to understand the woman. Judy Garland wasn't just an icon. She was a cautionary tale in Technicolor. As Harper dug into the archives of Hollywood's golden age, the smiling face of Dorothy Gale gave way to a tortured soul who had spent her life chasing applause, and whose pain had become part of her legend. Behind every photo of Judy waving to crowds or singing on stage, Harper found stories of pills, pressure, and a system that consumed its brightest stars whole. Judy was born Frances Ethelgum in 1922 into a vaudeville family. By the time she was a teenager, she was signed to MGM Studios, where they began shaping her into a product, one that needed to be thinner, perkier, more perfect than real life allowed. They gave her amphetamines to keep her awake, barbiturates to help her sleep, and orders to never gain an ounce. Her first major breakout role came at 16, playing Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. While the world saw innocence, the studio saw a marketable figure. Judy was their cash cow, and she wasn't allowed to break. One of the most harrowing documents Harper uncovered was a personal letter Judy wrote in the early 1960s, never sent. It had been auctioned off decades later and stored in a private collector's vault. In it, Judy wrote, "There are days I can't tell if I'm awake or still in one of their dreams. I don't know who I am when I'm not performing." That line haunted Harper. Judy wasn't just manipulated. She was split. The real woman faded, leaving behind only the stage version. And maybe, just maybe, that fractured spirit is what now wandered the spaces she once filled with her voice. To dig deeper, Harper arranged a visit with a renowned psychic medium in Los Angeles, Evelyn Markham, a woman in her 70s who had once worked as a wardrobe assistant on classic films. Evelyn had met Judy once in passing, during a frantic costume fitting for a 1954 comeback. She was trembling, Evelyn recalled. Not from cold, but from fear. She kept asking if she looked fat, if her voice would hold. She wasn't talking to me. Really, she was talking to ghosts of her own. Harper explained her dreams, the voice in the dressing room, and her growing sense that Judy was reaching out. Evelyn agreed to help her make contact, but warned her, "Spirits like Judy's don't whisper. They scream," because they were never heard while they were alive. The seance was held in a quiet bungalow in the Hollywood Hills, a place once rumored to have hosted underground studio parties in the 1950s. Harper sat in a circle with Evelyn and two of Evelyn's trusted assistants. Candles flickered. A recording device was placed in the center of the room. Evelyn entered a trance, her breath slow and shallow. Then the temperature dropped. "I see her," Evelyn whispered. "She's wearing red. Not the slippers, just a dress. She's holding a small glass bottle. She's trembling. She's looking in a mirror, but the mirror is fogged. She says, 'I don't want to go back.'" Harper's skin crawled. The room felt charged with static, as if invisible fingers were brushing against her skin. Evelyn gasped suddenly. "She's here, and she's angry. Not at you, but at them. She says, 'They took everything. They even took my rest.'" The candles went out. Later, when Harper reviewed the tape, she heard something chilling. Just after the moment Evelyn claimed the spirit entered the room, a third voice, raspy, desperate, was faintly audible. "You promised," it said. "You said it would be over." The next morning, Harper woke from a vivid nightmare. She was standing in a spotlight, on a stage that stretched endlessly into darkness. Her shoes were red and tight. People screamed her name, but she couldn't see them. She couldn't speak. Her voice had been taken. And far behind her, somewhere in the black void, a child's voice whispered, "Don't let them make you forget who you are." The haunting wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Judy Garland's suffering had left a psychic scar on the city, etched into dressing rooms, stages, and hearts. Her ghost wasn't trapped by death. It was trapped by memory, by the parts of herself she was never allowed to keep. And Harper knew. If she was going to survive this investigation, she would have to walk Judy's road from innocence to madness and face whatever waited at the end. After the seance with Evelyn, Harper felt something shift, not just in the way she viewed the story, but in the air around her. It was as though a door had opened, and something was now following her, trailing just behind her shoulder. She tried to ignore the feeling and stay focused. The next phase of her research took her to the infamous Stage 27, where rumors of paranormal activity dated back to the early 2000s, when a young starlet filming a musical revival reportedly collapsed mid-shoot and began speaking in Garland's voice. Harper had heard the stories, but they always felt like urban legends, until she saw it for herself. The studio had long since stopped using Stage 27 for official productions. The few who worked nearby called it cursed. But on a sweltering Thursday afternoon, Harper was granted permission to step inside with a studio manager named Carla, a former lighting tech who had refused to go near the building for almost 10 years. "The last time I was here," Carla muttered, her voice tight with old fear, "we were filming a Dorothy-themed commercial. The lead actress, Erin Kincaid, started acting strange. According to Carla, it began with small things. Erin would sit in the original dressing room, applying makeup even though she had professionals assigned to her. She insisted on using a vintage red lipstick shade called Garland Rose that hadn't been manufactured since the 50s. Then came the humming, soft and off-key versions of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, always just under her breath, always when she thought no one was watching. The crew chalked it up to nerves until she fainted during rehearsal. Harper stepped into the very dressing room where Erin had supposedly been possessed. The room had been sealed off after the incident, never repainted or renovated. The mirror was still cracked, a jagged line slicing across the center like a scar. The chair sat askew, as though someone had jumped up from it mid-scream. And the air was still, not stale, not cold, just still, as if the room itself was holding its breath. She turned on her recorder and sat at the vanity, watching her reflection. Nothing moved, no sounds, until she noticed a tiny dark spot forming at the base of the mirror. It grew slowly, like condensation, until it took the shape of a teardrop. Another followed, then another. Within minutes, the mirror looked as though someone behind it was crying. Harper stood up so fast her chair clattered backward. She reached out to touch the glass, and her fingers came back wet. She wiped her hand on her jeans, her heart pounding. "Who's here?" she whispered aloud. "Judy, is this you?" There was no answer, only a low, vibrating hum that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. Harper looked down and noticed her voice recorder's digital screen blinking wildly, capturing interference or perhaps something else. Static poured from the speaker. In the middle of the distortion, a voice pierced through, "They lied to me." She stumbled back, hitting the wall. "Who lied to you?" she demanded. "What do they take from you?" Silence. Then a second message, clear, chilling, and filled with heartbreak. "They said I'd be free." Harper left the room immediately, her body shaking as if she had just run miles. Carla, waiting outside, saw her expression and nodded solemnly. "That's how you know she's real," she said. "You don't see her. You feel her. You carry her sorrow like it's your own." That night, Harper couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mirror, crying, dripping with invisible grief. She dreamt of being backstage in black and white, hearing stage managers yelling places while she tried to scream for help, but her voice never came. In the dream, she looked into the same cracked mirror, and Judy was on the other side, mirroring her movements, smiling, but not with joy, with despair. Harper awoke drenched in sweat. On the nightstand beside her recorder was a small object she didn't recognize, a vintage makeup compact with the initials JG engraved in cursive. She had not brought it. No one else had access to her room. The line between research and haunting had blurred completely. Harper realized she was no longer documenting the haunting of Judy Garland. She was becoming part of it. What terrified her most was the growing suspicion that Judy didn't want help. She wanted Harper to feel what she felt, to suffer as she did, to finally be heard. And now, Harper was listening. whether she wanted to or not. After the terrifying experience in the crying dressing room, Harper knew she was slipping into deeper waters, far deeper than she'd ever anticipated. What had begun as a historical exploration into the legacy of Judy Garland was now taking on a sinister edge. She could feel it in her dreams, in the static on her recorder, and in the haunted, broken melody of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But nothing had prepared her for what she would uncover next. Determined to track down more first-hand accounts of Judy's lingering spirit, Harper began chasing a particularly disturbing rumor that in the late 1980s, a stuntwoman named Rayanne Dorsey had been possessed while filming a commercial shoot on the infamous Stage 27. The event had supposedly been covered up by the studio and dismissed as an emotional breakdown, but whispers suggested otherwise. After weeks of searching, Harper finally tracked Rayanne down. Now in her 60s and living quietly in Nevada, Rayanne initially refused to speak. "That woman nearly ruined my life," she said flatly over the phone. Or maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was what they did to her. It took several calls and Harper's genuine desperation before Rayanne agreed to meet her at a quiet diner just outside Las Vegas. Face to face, Rayanne looked like someone still carrying the weight of what happened decades ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee. "You won't believe me," she said, eyes fixed on the window, "but I swear on my life, for 3 full days I wasn't myself. I was her." According to Rayanne, she had been hired to do stunt choreography for a music video recreating scenes from The Wizard of Oz. It was a stylized project, modern sets, vintage costumes. Rayanne was responsible for a segment involving falling petals and a dramatic spin. Simple, until she tried on the costume. "They gave me this replica of Judy's Dorothy dress," she said, voice tightening. "I remember pulling it over my head, and then nothing. For the next 72 hours, I was gone." Rayanne's co-workers told her later that she started speaking in a strange voice, one with a slight Midwestern accent. She kept calling people Mr. Mayor and Miss Temple. She sang softly to herself even when the cameras weren't rolling. She refused to eat anything but broth and crackers. Most disturbingly, she wept silently whenever anyone mentioned home. They said I kept repeating, "He said I could rest now. He said it was over." Rayanne's eyes began to shine with tears. "But I didn't know who he was. I still don't." Harper showed Rayanne a photo of Louis B. Mayer, the infamous MGM executive known for controlling every aspect of Garland's early life and career. Rayanne's lips tightened. "That's him. That's the voice I kept responding to." After the 3rd day, Rayanne collapsed on set and was rushed to the hospital. Her vitals were normal, but she remained unconscious for several hours. When she woke, she had no memory of what had happened, only flashes of standing in front of blinding light, reaching toward an audience she couldn't see, and someone in the wings whispering, "We're not done yet." Harper asked if Rayanne ever felt like Judy was still with her. She hesitated before nodding. "Sometimes, when I pass a mirror, I catch my reflection singing, but my lips aren't moving." She laughed bitterly. "I haven't worn red shoes since." After the interview, Harper drove back in silence, her mind racing. Rayanne's account was more than just compelling. It was corroborated. Harper found a medical report dated the same week, noting dissociative symptoms, classic fugue behavior, and even references to the subject singing Wizard of Oz songs in a voice uncharacteristic of the patient. There was also a curious note scribbled in the margin. Possible psychological imprint? Hypnosis? But what if it wasn't psychological at all? That night, Harper couldn't sleep. At 3:11 a.m., she was awakened by a loud thump. She checked the living room and found her TV, unplugged, suddenly playing static. As she approached, the screen flashed briefly. For a fraction of a second, a black and white frame appeared, Judy Garland, looking directly at the camera, eyes wide, mouth open like she was mid-song or mid-scream. Harper shut off the TV and turned to find a pair of faint footprints, bare, damp, and unmistakably human, leading from her front door to the mirror above the fireplace. She had come searching for a ghost story. Now the ghost had found her. The further Harper plunged into Judy Garland's haunted legacy, the more blurred the lines became between myth and reality, between past and present, and most disturbingly, between herself and the woman she was chasing. The footprints, the crying mirror, the voices, they all pointed to something unresolved. Judy's ghost wasn't merely an echo. It was active, desperate, and focused. And Harper was now undeniably a part of whatever this lingering spirit was trying to finish. It was during one of her late-night research sessions that Harper stumbled upon something different, something that made her breath itch. On an obscure message board frequented by Hollywood conspiracy theorists and paranormal enthusiasts, she found a thread titled, "The Yellow Brick Road Ritual, Garland's Gate." The post, dated 1999, detailed a secret seance conducted by a group of Judy Garland superfans on the 30th anniversary of her death. The ritual was reportedly performed inside a forgotten theater in East LA, an abandoned cinema built in the 1930s and once used for private industry screenings. According to the account, 7 participants had gathered to walk the yellow brick road, a phrase they used symbolically. The group dressed in costumes resembling Oz characters, each member representing a different persona from Judy's films. They lit 7 candles, sang her songs in order of her filmography, and read aloud from her biography. The goal, they claimed, was not to summon Judy, but to set her free. But something else came. Harper traced the thread's author to a man named Nolan Reeve, the only surviving member of the ritual group. Now reclusive and mentally unstable, Nolan agreed to meet her only under strict conditions: no cameras, no voice recorders, and never to speak his name in the final story. They met in a rundown motel near Echo Park. Nolan was thin, pale, and jittery. He clutched a faded photo of the group, 7 smiling fans in makeshift Oz costumes, standing beneath a crumbling marquee that read, "Follow the Yellow Brick Road." "There were 8 of us that night," Nolan whispered, his eyes darting around the room. "Only 7 invited." Harper leaned forward. "What do you mean?" After the 3rd candle, "Someone else joined the circle," Nolan said. "We thought she was just late. Dressed in a plain blue dress, hair curled, red slippers." No one questioned it. How could we? She looked just like her. Just like Judy. As they recited lines from Meet Me in St. Louis, things turned eerie. The lights flickered. The air turned cold. The woman, who hadn't spoken all evening, began to sing softly, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." Only it was slow, mournful, and wrong. The pitch warped. The flame from one of the candles flared violently, and the building trembled. She wasn't Judy, Nolan said with a tremor in his voice. She was something that remembered being Judy. After the seance, each member of the group began experiencing nightmares. Then, one by one, they died under bizarre circumstances. One drowned in a bathtub, another was hit by a streetcar, and 2 were found dead in their homes with no signs of trauma. But in each scene, red slippers were found near the bodies. Untouched, clean, perfect. Nolan fled and never spoke of it again, until Harper. Back at her apartment, Harper found herself obsessed with the ritual. She tried to piece it together. 7 candles, 7 songs, 7 names. She played Garland's records backward, looking for hidden messages. She listened to old interview tapes, scanning for strange pauses or unexplained whispers. It was as if something wanted her to repeat the ritual, something waiting on the other side of the rainbow. Then, one evening, she returned home to find a VHS tape resting on her doorstep. It was unlabeled. She played it, and the footage was grainy, unsteady, clearly shot in secret. It showed the seance. The group seated in a circle. The candles. The costumes. Then the entrance of the unknown woman in the blue dress. Harper's blood ran cold. The woman's face was briefly caught on camera. She was smiling, wide, eerie, glassy-eyed. It was Judy Garland, or someone pretending to be her. The film distorted as the last candle blew out, and the screen turned black. A voice whispered, "You open the road. You have to finish the walk." Harper paused the tape. Her own reflection stared back at her in the TV screen, distorted, pale, and trembling. She realized then, this wasn't about recording a story anymore. It was about completing something unfinished. something that had started with Judy and would end with her. The yellow brick road wasn't just metaphorical. It was spiritual, and Harper had already taken her first steps. Just when Harper believed the haunting couldn't get any deeper, a mystery arrived on her doorstep, literally. One morning, she found a worn manila envelope resting outside her apartment door. There was no return address, just her name handwritten in black ink. Inside were 3 unlabeled cassette tapes, a typed note, and a small Polaroid photograph. The note was chilling in its simplicity. She never stopped trying to come back. Don't believe the stories. She didn't want rest. She wanted connection. These are for you now. LM. Harper's hands trembled. LM, could it really be Liza Minnelli, Judy Garland's daughter? The photograph offered no confirmation, but it showed a young Liza, barely 20, standing beside her mother's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The smile on her face was warm, but her eyes were heavy, distant. Wasting no time, Harper found her old tape recorder and pressed play. Tape 1. A soft static gave way to a hesitant voice. It was unmistakably Liza, her iconic tone subdued, like someone speaking to themselves in a confession booth. I don't know why I'm doing this. Maybe to understand. Maybe to finally stop dreaming of her crying. Liza described growing up in a house that never really slept. Her mother would sing lullabies long after midnight, pacing the hallways in a silk robe, whispering to things that weren't there. She would stare into mirrors and say, "Tell them I'm still here." Not like she was rehearsing. Like she believed the mirror would respond. She described nights filled with strange occurrences. Mirrors fogging over without cause, lights flickering even when they weren't wired, and the sound of humming drifting through the air vents. Sometimes Judy's voice would echo from nowhere, singing songs she hadn't sung in years. I thought she was going crazy, but I was young. I didn't know what grief does when it's alive. Tape 2. This tape was harder to listen to. The audio was warped, static-heavy, interrupted by mechanical clicks. But Liza's voice still emerged. It got worse after she died. I had dreams every night of her standing at the end of my bed, not speaking, just looking like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Sometimes I'd wake up with her perfume in the air. I even smelled her cigarettes, Marlboro Reds. There was no one else in the apartment. Liza began consulting spiritualists, desperate to make contact or to cut the cord. One warned her that Judy's energy had become fragmented. Pieces of her were scattered across the world. Like confetti, the medium said. Each place she suffered held a piece of her soul. But one spiritualist, an older man from New York, had offered a darker theory. Judy hadn't passed on it all. She was caught in a loop, a spiritual replay of her trauma, strengthened by decades of adoration and sorrow. He told me, the more the world remembers her sadness, the more she lives it. Memory is keeping her here. Fame is her prison. Tape 3. The final recording was almost unbearable. Liza sounded different, shaken, maybe in tears. In the background, something faint played, an old recording of Over the Rainbow, warped and off-key. Liza's voice came through, broken and whispering. She spoke to me in a dream, clearer than ever. She said, "They promised me peace, they lied." She was in a blue dress. Her feet were bare. She looked at me and said, "I need her to finish the walk." She hears me now. She feels me. Harper's blood froze. Was Judy talking about her? As the tape neared its end, a voice, not Liza's, briefly cut through the background noise. It was soft and melodic, but wrong somehow, like a radio signal barely coming through. "Tell her to sing for me. Then I can rest." The tape clicked off. Harper sat in silence for nearly an hour after the final tape. Everything felt heavier now. Liza hadn't just believed her mother was trying to come back. She knew it. And Judy, or whatever remained of her, had identified Harper as a vessel. A link, maybe even a replacement. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't just haunting. It was an invitation. Later that night, Harper stood in front of her mirror. She stared at herself, as Judy once had. Her fingers reached up and touched the glass. And faintly, impossibly, the mirror fogged. 2 words appeared in the condensation. "Sing now." Harper had always been a woman of logic, grounded in facts, research, and evidence. But by now, all of that had dissolved into shadows. She wasn't merely investigating Judy Garland's haunting. She was being summoned into it. The voices, the dreams, the mirror messages, and now the tapes from Liza Minnelli had confirmed it. Judy's ghost wasn't lost. It was active, searching for release, or something more sinister. For days, Harper felt pulled by an invisible thread, one that tugged at her thoughts, her sleep, her very sense of identity. She wasn't just a journalist anymore. She was becoming a participant in the final chapter of Judy's story. The ghost had chosen her, and that terrifying truth became undeniable when she discovered the location. Deep in the margins of Liza's typewritten note, there had been a faint address. El Royale Theater, private screening room beneath the stage. The El Royale was an old cinema turned underground jazz club, now defunct, its doors locked since the early 2000s. Records showed it had been a popular haunt for MGM stars in the 40s, a hidden retreat where executives and performers gathered away from the press and public. No one had filmed there in decades. No one had performed there in longer. But someone, or something, had been waiting. On a stormy Friday night, Harper broke into the El Royale. The building was silent, the lobby drenched in dust and cobwebs. Her flashlight flickered across faded posters of Golden Age musicals, the smiling faces of stars who had long since faded into history. She found the backstage corridor, and after several locked doors and a rusted gate, she descended into the private screening room beneath the stage. It was exactly as described, a narrow amphitheater with velvet chairs, a cracked screen, and a dusty piano in the corner. But the strangest thing of all was that the stage was already lit. Soft yellow light bathed the wood floor. No sound system, no power, just a golden glow, like a spotlight from nowhere. And on that stage, a pair of red slippers. They shimmered under the light, untouched by dust, as if they had just been placed there by invisible hands. Harper stepped forward. Every bone in her body screamed at her to leave, but her feet moved of their own accord. Something was guiding her, pulling her into the performance Judy had never finished. She stood in the center of the stage. The slippers were just in front of her, and then the air changed. A faint piano began to play. No one sat at the keys, but the music rang out, slow, haunting the opening notes of Over the Rainbow. Harper's throat tightened. She hadn't sung since childhood, and yet her lips began to move. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, her voice cracked, then strengthened, as if something else was rising up within her. The sound echoed through the chamber, wrapping around her like silk and smoke. She sang verse after verse, feeling not just the melody, but Judy's sorrow, her exhaustion, her longing for peace. It wasn't just a song. It was a release. As she reached the final line, "Why, oh, why can't I?" the spotlight flared bright, then burst into darkness. Complete, suffocating blackness. For a moment, there was silence. Then applause. Faint at first, like a ripple. Then louder and louder. Harper turned in circles. She was alone on stage, but the room was full. The sound of clapping echoed all around her. Whistles, cheers, chants of Judy, Judy, rising from invisible mouths. She felt dizzy, trapped, exposed. Suddenly, she saw her, Judy, standing at the back of the theater. Her face was pale. Her lips parted in a sad smile. She wore the same blue gingham dress. Nos juice. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she mouthed one word. Thank you. Then the ghost vanished. And so did the sound. Harper collapsed to her knees. The stage was cold. The air smelled like perfume and old roses. She stayed there for minutes, maybe hours, until the lights returned. Dim, normal. The slippers were gone. So was the piano. But her recorder, which she had placed on the edge of the stage, was blinking. Still running. Still capturing everything. Back in her apartment, Harper replayed the audio. What she heard chilled her soul. At the end of her song, just after the final note, a second voice joined hers, soft, broken, unmistakably Judy's. They sang the last line together. Why, oh, why can't I? Then silence. Then a breath. And a whisper. Now I can sleep. The days after Harper's performance at the El Royale felt unreal. She had crossed a line between life and something far beyond it, into a realm where memory bled into spirit and voices from the past echoed through the present. Judy Garland was no longer just the subject of her research. She was a presence that had become entangled with Harper's very identity. And although the ghost had whispered, "Now I can sleep," Harper wasn't sure if she herself would ever rest again. She tried to go back to normal. She left Hollywood, returning to her small apartment in San Diego. Her editor was still waiting for the final draft of her book, unaware of the spiritual storm Harper had just survived. But every time she tried to write, the words wouldn't come. Something felt unfinished. A week after the El Royale ritual, Harper received a call from Carla, the lighting tech who had helped her access stage 27. Her voice was low and urgent. "Did you move anything from the dressing room?" Harper hesitated. "No." "What?" Carla paused. "The mirror's been shattered. Completely. Like it exploded outward. And someone left something on the vanity." Harper felt her chest tighten. What was it? A pair of red slippers. That same day, a package arrived at Harper's door. No posti. No note. Inside was a single object, a black and white photo of Judy Garland. She was backstage, sitting before a mirror, looking over her shoulder with an expression Harper could only describe as relieved. Behind her, barely visible in the reflection, was a shadow, a woman with long hair. Harper's hair. She dropped the photo. That night, her dreams returned. In them, Harper found herself walking a long hallway lined with curtains. Behind each one, a different scene from Judy's life replayed. Her childhood auditions, her pill-laced dressing rooms, her last concert in London. Harper passed each one, not as an observer, but as a participant. People called her Judy. They gave her cue cards. They placed microphones in her hand. She sang until her voice cracked. And then, in the final room, there was nothing but silence. A mirror stood at the center. As Harper approached, she didn't see herself. She saw Judy, older, tired but smiling. The mirror shimmered, and the glass cracked slightly at the corners. "Thank you," Judy said again. "You walked the road for me. Now walk away." Harper awoke with tears in her eyes. She packed her recorder, her tapes, her notes, and locked them in a box. She didn't want to sell the story. She didn't want to profit from it. Something told her that doing so would reopen the door. And Harper, for all her curiosity, had learned one thing for certain. Some encores are never meant to happen. A year passed. Harper moved to the East Coast. Quiet town. No studio lots. No red carpets. She taught creative writing at a community college. She didn't speak of Judy. She didn't write about Hollywood. The past was locked away. Until one day, she received an email. The subject line read, "She sang again." Attached was a short video clip taken by a tourist on the MGM backlit tour. It showed a young woman wandering off the marked path and standing in front of the old stage 27 dressing room. In the background, the audio picked up something faint, a voice. Crystal clear. Familiar. Singing. Somewhere over the rainbow, the same warped, weeping melody Harper had sung. Only this time, it wasn't her. It had started again. 63.